How late do you like your Josh Naylor takes? Every single person has weighed in at this point. How much do you like takes on Seattle sports from comedians you've never heard of? Because I have both those things. A late take from a comedian you've never heard of. I was in Louisville and when I came home, I got sick. My daughter's got me sick. The Josh Naylor news broke, and I have been preserving my voice for comedy shows, but here we are. I have a light slate of shows coming up. Still a little bit sick, to be honest with you, but we're going to talk about Josh Naylor. Josh Naylor signed a 5-year, $92.5 million contract with the Mariners. It's backloaded, so they have some financial flexibility. I had previously said the highest I would like to go for Josh Naylor is 3 years, $60 million. The annual average value, we were in the range. I thought SpotTrack had his market value at like $54 million, so we're in kind of the middle range of those two annual average value numbers. The Mariners decide whether it's because they were bidding against themselves, because there was a ton of interest in the league, whatever. They decide to go for a 4th and 5th year, which I'm not particularly comfortable with, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I said on Dan Vien's podcast, and maybe this podcast also, Dan Vien's podcast is the Mariners Forever podcast. I said that there's a chance that the Mariners are going to make a signing of Josh Naylor that I would not consider an F grade signing. I'd consider it like a C-, C+ signing. 5 years, $100 million. And I would be happy that Josh Naylor would be back. But I would be a little bit worried about the final years of that contract. And that's basically come completely true. I'm worried about years 4 and 5 of this contract. I think that Josh Naylor, there's a very good chance he's going to take a Prince Fielder path, that he's going to take a Pablo Sandoval path and become not a good enough hitter to justify the money, not enough hitter to justify playing first base. And also the Mariners, like many teams, by the way, have a log jam at DH. This idea that you can just put him at DH, put J.P. Crawford at DH, put Jorge Polanco at DH, put Randy Arozarena at DH. These are roster problems. Put Mitch Garver at DH. These are roster issues. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I suspect that 2026 will be a good Josh Naylor year, and I think that the Mariners have a chance to win the World Series in 2026. So I would much rather the team overpay a little bit, overextend themselves a little bit, create a longer contract that I'm particularly comfortable with, than not have an answer at first base, not have an adequate first baseman in 2026. Because, and I'll tell you, like, I don't believe in this idea that they have to have a first baseman in development. I think first basemen come from a lot of places. And by saying I think, I don't really mean I think. I mean, if you go look at the history of first basemen, if you go look at the original position most first basemen in Major League Baseball played, a ton of them are not originally first base. In fact, that was my biggest criticism when the Mariners drafted DJ Peterson. And by the way, I believe that was the year they could have drafted J.P. Crawford, and I would have been stoked. I was on J.P. Crawford from the beginning. But they drafted DJ Peterson, and he had one position. He was never going to really stick at third base in Major League Baseball. So that meant he had to hit great. To contribute at all at the Major League level, he had to hit great. I think there's a bunch of guys that could potentially become first basemen in this system. That would be bad news for a lot of them. A lot of them are slated to play tougher defensive positions. So anyways, that's to get beyond that point. I'm not worried about them not having a first baseman in the system. I wouldn't have been against Jorge Polanco playing first base. I wouldn't have been against Luke Raley getting another shot at first base. I wouldn't have been against a cheaper option. But Josh Naylor is a rare hitter that wanted to remain in Seattle. That's something valuable to the Mariners. That's something that the Mariners maybe have to consider more than any team in baseball, is the fact that no hitters want to play here. No hitters who are seeking a contract after they play in Seattle are going to want to sign a contract in Seattle, because whenever they get to the point of that second contract, it's going to be significantly suppressed by T-Mobile's ballpark factors. So if you factor in that nobody wants to play here. Nobody wants to hit here. And I think that stigma might be leaving. Obviously, Cal Raleigh playing his home games in T-Mobile Park, hit 60 home runs. Julio Rodriguez had a pretty good offensive year. Josh Naylor had a pretty good offensive year. Randy Arozarena had a pretty good offensive year. Jorge Polanco had a pretty good offensive year. Guys are hitting in T-Mobile Park, but the stigma is probably still there some, and there's no guarantee. I don't think Pete Alonso would want to come to Seattle. I think both these guys, Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso, have had a chance to come to Seattle. I don't even know if you're going to be able to sign. I'd be curious to see what even a negotiation would start with on Gino Suarez, because I think Gino Suarez would have been a fine first baseman. I think he's a very good third baseman. I think if you bring back Gino, the plan would be to play him at third base. I'm not advocating for that, by the way. I think that his struggles in T-Mobile Park crop back up. He had the biggest hit, arguably the biggest hit in Mariners history, but he struggled. His time in Seattle, he struggled quite a bit. And through the postseason, he was struggling quite a bit. He hits that enormous grand slam, the game I was at. But I'm scared of bringing Gino back. But, so, Josh Naylor. His annual average value is $19 million and change. So, no, $18 million and change. So he's being paid like a guy that's worth about 2.5 wins above replacement. A little bit less than that, actually. In about 4 seasons of work, he's been worth 2.5 wins above replacement. I think that I'm gonna say something that might sound like I'm justifying the trade or the signing. I'm giving the signing a C-. I don't think it's great value. I think Josh Naylor's got some. I don't think it's great value if Josh Naylor was 6'5" and 220 pounds and built like an Adonis. He happens to be 5'11", and I'd bet so much money that he was playing the end of last season at 275 or greater. And I have worries about that. And it's not to fat shame. If I was here to fat shame, you should see my act, because I'm fat shaming myself on stage. I'm not here to put a morality on Josh Naylor's build. Just here to report the facts. The guys of that build, on average, have shorter careers, have steeper declines, and they end faster. Again, Pablo Sandoval, Prince Fielder. And that's not the only guys. Those are just the two contemporary guys that I think make sense. Both those guys had a little more, I think, star power than Josh Naylor does. But both guys, precipitous falls. Youth is not something I really care about with Josh Naylor, because I think, I would argue that in 5 years, Pete Alonso probably will be producing at a similar or better rate than Josh Naylor, even though Josh Naylor's younger. Pete Alonso might not have been an option for the Mariners. Very likely wasn't an option for the Mariners. So I'm not, and that's actually the most important point about Josh Naylor, I think. The thing that works in the Mariners' favor, the thing that brings the grade up from like a D grade, because I would not have had this as an F grade regardless. But the thing that brings it up from a D grade to a C for me, and I know, I'm going to say one other thing. A C is not an exciting grade. It's not a provocative grade. There's no money to be made in having a middle-of-the-road opinion on sports. So just know, if you're here, this is genuine opinion. Obviously, I'm not giving a C grade for clicks, because nobody gives a shit. The thing that brings it from a D to a C, in my opinion, is how hard it's been for the Mariners to bring offensive talent to Seattle. So you got stability, you got a guy that hits well, you have a guy that fits the organization's philosophy. Now, I would argue that the organization's philosophy on contact is flawed, and I think it's interesting that they ended up with Gino Suarez and Josh Naylor with that specific organizational philosophy, because these guys are on two opposite ends of the contact to power spectrum. Josh Naylor can hit for power, but his average exit velocity is actually very low. Bottom third of the league. Gino Suarez sells out all the time. Josh Naylor doesn't strike out very much. Gino Suarez strikes out a lot, and even more when he came to Seattle. I do think that I think if you were like in a vacuum, who's going to be better in the next 2 years? Just 2 years. If you signed Jorge Polanco and allowed him to play first base, or Josh Naylor and allowed him to play first base, I mean, I genuinely think it's a coin flip for the next 2 years. So that's where I have some problems. Josh Naylor the fan base loves him. 3XL t-shirts or 3XL jerseys and jerseys of Josh Naylor are going to sell out. He's likable. He's fun. Plays hard. An absolute dirtbag. He has all the makings of a fan favorite, and he is a fan favorite. The fans love him, as they should. I think Jorge Polanco has a pretty good chance of being roughly the same level of productivity. And if you move to first base, would you be a little bit less worried about his injury concerns? Maybe. I don't know. To me, that's why it's not a sexy move. I do think it's a move that has animated the fan base. And it's really easy to say at any point in an offseason, well, this can't be the only move. Of course. Of course. Anyone that's saying that, like, of course. Yeah. Josh Naylor alone does not bring a World Series to Seattle. The team is not better today than they were the day they lost to the Toronto Blue Jays to be eliminated from the playoffs. Of course, Josh Naylor isn't the only move, but he's probably the only true first baseman that they had a real chance of getting. And although I think you have a problem at DH, I'm still in favor of bringing Jorge Polanco back. Let him play some second base. Let him play some third base. He's an emergency backup at shortstop. Let him play some first base. Let him spell Josh Naylor. Shit. Let him try the outfield. He was a competent fielder early in his career and a very good hitter. You need more of those guys, not less of them. I want to talk more this offseason about what to do with JP Crawford, what to do with Randy Arozarena. We'll do that for sure. Also, please come see me do comedy, Casey McLean Comedy, everywhere you go, except for Twitter, where I'm the Casey McLean, because Casey McLean Comedy, it's too many characters. Come see me. I'll be at Tacoma Comedy Club opening for my buddy Josh Firestein here in a couple weeks, and I'm all over the Northwest, all over the country. If you live in Wisconsin for some reason, I'll be out there in mid-December with Gabriel Rutledge. Thank you for listening to this, and I'll talk to you later.